Hosea chapter 6. I can remember when our children were young saying, "What am I going to do with you?" You ever heard that or thought that? It was usually when they had done something that they should not have done, and I would say, "What am I going to do with you?" One of our children, the constant reply was, "Keep me." In Hosea chapter 6, we read this statement from our Lord. We read, "Come, and let us return to the Lord, for he hath torn and he will heal us. He hath smitten us and he will bind us. After 2 days he will revive us, and then the third day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. Then shall we know, if we follow on, to know the Lord. His going forth is prepared as the morning, and he shall come unto us as the rain, as the latter and former rain unto the earth. O Ephraim, what shall I do unto thee?" You know, God can do anything. He could make us do whatever he wants us to do. You ever think about that? God could just say, "Hey, do it." And you'd have no choice. Yet it's interesting, he allows us to choose. With grandchildren, I can tell them to do something, but I can't make them do it. As a parent, you've come across that, haven't you? You can tell them. You can say, "If you don't, I'm going to do this," but at the end of the day, whose choice is it? It's their choice. You can't make them do it. Even if on the outside you can make their arms do what you want them to do, on the inside they're going, "Mm-mm." You know, we can choose to obey, to trust, or we can choose to disobey. We don't typically talk like that in church, but in our daily habits, we can choose to obey, we can choose to trust God, or we can choose to disobey. We can choose to take from God and give credit for that gift to someone else. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. I'm not even going to ask you to blink. Have you ever done that? Have you ever received God's goodness but not given God credit for the goodness that he gives you? James, the brother of Jesus, made this statement. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above. Every good gift. If you got a good gift, no matter who took credit for it, where's it from? It's from above. It's from God. And I think it's not new to our generation. As we look at Hosea chapter 6, what I want you to notice is beginning in chapter 4 through chapter 10, we see God telling Israel what they have done wrong. And it's uncomfortable. We don't enjoy reading it because we much prefer seminar benefit kind of things. You know, where you go in, you sit down, you got your notebook, and they're saying, "Boy, this would really help your life, and this would really help your life." And you're going, "Yeah, I think I'll have a little of that, and I'll have a little of this, and I don't care for that so much." And we walk away and we feel pretty good. But in the Minor Prophets, God takes time to describe in painful detail what Israel is doing that's wrong. Why does God do that? because he wants Israel to understand what's wrong. Maybe your parents or your grandparents, someone has told you, don't do that, that's wrong. And in your mind you're going, I don't get it. Grandparenting this week to a 4, a 3, and an almost 2-year-old. I find throughout the entire day I am saying, we're not going to do that because of this. Oh. And sometimes I'll say, okay, we're not going to get in the pool right now because we're just about to eat. So you can play in the backyard, you can play on the other toys, but don't get in the pool. What do you guess? And I'll say, did you hear what Papa said? Usually I get a blank stare at first. And so I just repeat the question, did you hear what Papa said? Well, yes. Why did you do that? Because I wanted to. Now, I'm sure your children and grandchildren don't do that. But God has given me several to remind me of what I'm like. You know, God takes time to describe Israel's wickedness, their disobedience, their rejection of God's authorship of kindness. Israel wanted to be like all the other nations. Do you remember that? They said, we want a king. We want to be like everyone else. We don't want to just follow you. We want to have a king like everyone else. They wanted all the blessings of God without saying we follow God. You know, God's blessing and wickedness are mutually exclusive. This is uncomfortable because we have the I do it syndrome. I'll do the seatbelt. I'll close the door. I put my shoes on. I do this. I do this. Papa help you? Oh no, I do it. And we still want all the benefits. We just don't want to give him credit. That's Israel. That's the book of Hosea. And we're going to jump back in the middle of this discussion. We're picking up the second half of Hosea's message as we start in chapter 6. Now notice as we look at verses 1 through 3, here we find something. They're talking to themselves, and it sounds really good. Come, let us return unto the Lord, for he hath torn, but he will heal us. He hath smitten, and he will bind us up. After 2 days he will revive us. In the 3rd day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. Then shall we know, if we follow on to know the Lord, his going forth is prepared as the morning. He shall come unto us as the rain, as the latter and former rain on the earth. Oh, God will bless us if we just kind of do some of the things. This isn't a wholehearted endorsement of doing what God wants. This is just the only way I know how to describe this attitude is this is religion rather than relationship. It's the checklist. If we do this, God surely is going to be obligated to bless us. And we read in verse 4, O Ephraim, a tender word for Israel, O Ephraim, what shall I do unto thee? O Judah, what shall I do unto thee? For your goodness, and what we're going to find as we read through this, we're going to find a lot of comparisons. So as you're reading it, don't get confused. He's just saying it's like this, it's like this, it's like this. He says, O Judah, what shall I do unto thee? For your goodness is as a morning cloud, and as the early dew it goeth away. Oh, it was sounding pretty good. In the morning when you look out on the grass, it looks like you've got all kind of sparkling jewels out in your yard when the sun hits the moisture, but what happens? It dries up and you really realize what your yard is like. He says, therefore I have hewed them by the prophets, I have slain them by the words of my mouth, and my judgments are as the light that goeth forth. For I desired mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. But they, like men, have transgressed the covenant. There they have dealt treacherously against me. So as we're thinking here, he's going to give several illustrations. He talks about first the morning dew. Then he's going to talk about an oven overheated. What you're going to find as we're reading through this is he's going to say, look, your lust is like an overheated oven. If you turn to chapter 7, God is saying, when I would have healed Israel, then the iniquity of Ephraim was discovered, and the wickedness of Samaria, for they commit falsehood, the thief cometh in, and the troop of robbers spoileth out. And they considered not in their hearts that I remember all their wickedness. Now their own doings have beset them about. They are before my face. They make the king glad with their wickedness, and the princes with their lies. They are all adulterers, as an oven heated by the baker, who ceaseth from rising after. He hath kneaded the dough until it be leavened. So what's that talking about? He's saying, one, you're like a morning dew. You look good, but when the heat comes, you're gone. Then he says, then you're like an oven that's been overheated. What's he saying? He says, well, today we just turn on our ovens. Back then, they would have to build the fire. Then they would bank the fire, and they would get it hot. And he said, Israel is like an oven that is so hot that he doesn't have to keep after it at night. It just stays hot because they are so given to their sin. It's just what's on their minds. They're overheated. He says they wanted to come on their own terms. They didn't remember that I remembered all their wickedness. He goes on to say, they thought they could get away with their many sins, but God saw them all and remembered them. Look at verse 8. He says, Ephraim, he hath mixed himself among the people. Ephraim is like a cake not turned. Again, I'm reading this, and when I was just reading this, it was like, what's a cake not turned? Well, the people in the east would bake on hot rocks. So they would get their dough, they would put them on the rocks, and then they would turn them so that the bread would be evenly cooked. He said, you're like a cake not turned. Strangers have devoured his strength. He knoweth it not. Yea, gray hairs are here and there upon him, yet he knoweth not. So he says, first of all, you're like an unturned cake. You've been mixing with the other nations, but rather than staying true to God, rather than just, what's the term? Selling and buying from other nations, they had entered into relationships with them. And therefore, they were like bread that was burned on one side and not cooked on the other. He said, you're like a person that's getting gray hair and doesn't even recognize it. What's he saying? You don't even recognize what's happening to you. In verse 11, he says, Ephraim is also like a silly dove without heart. So he says, They call to Egypt. They go to Assyria. Literally, he's saying, you flit here, you fly there, you try this, you try that, but you don't even know the direction you're going. If they had listened to what God had said through the prophets, you know what would have taken place? They would have recognized that Assyria was going to come in and capture them. They were going to recognize that Egypt couldn't help them. Look at verse 16. They return, but not to the Most High. They are like a deceitful bow. God had given them everything they needed. God had shown them how to go straight, and God is comparing them to a deceitful bow. You pull back, you release, but it doesn't go where you're thinking. When our children were younger, we had Nerf wars in our basement. And back then, they had Nerf arrows that were this big, and they had full-size bows. And we would shoot at each other, and shoot at each other, and shoot at each other downstairs, and we'd collect each other's ammunition and shoot it back. Well, we had electric baseboard heat in one of our houses, and one of the arrows got left on the baseboard. So it kind of drooped. The last part of it, where you put it on to the Nerf gun to shoot it, worked great. But it kind of did this. That was an arrow you never could shoot straight. Now, it was really cool because my kids would hide around the corner, and if I would back up just the right steps, if I would draw a bow, it would go and could hit them. But it was a deceitful arrow. It was a deceitful bow. You couldn't tell exactly where it was going without practice with that. Here, God is calling them a deceitful bow. They're not what they ought to be. Now, we go into chapter 8. He says, set the trumpet to thy mouth. Now, what he's saying here is, he's done this once before in chapter 5, where he's saying, I'm going to blow a warning. And he talks about, first of all, there's going to be an eagle that's going to come. And in this, he's going to give some analogies. In verses 1 through 6, he talks about the house of the Lord. The house of the Lord is Israel. And he's saying, Assyria, which is the eagle, will swoop down and destroy because of the nation's idolatry. God would do that? God would let someone come in? Absolutely, because God is more interested in what you are than what you have. God is more interested in your character than in your circumstances. And God will allow things into our lives because he wants to see our lives change. And we say, no, God, I'm not changing, not doing it. And God says, okay. And he allows our heart to keep going, but he also allows others into our lives that make things very difficult and that push us. Look at verse 7 with me. He moves on and he talks about sowing and reaping. He says, for they have sown the wind, they reap the whirlwind. It hath no stalk, the bud shall yield no meal. If it be so, if so it be yield, the stranger shall swallow it up. What's he saying? He says, you're sowing something, but you're expecting something different. You're sowing good seed, you're hoping to get good seed, but the reality is, he says, you sow, what you sow you reap, not what you want to reap. You ever done some things that you shouldn't have done, but hoped you'd get something good anyway out of it? He's saying it's not going to happen. And then he goes on to tell them, anything that you do reap, he says, in reality, someone else is going to come and take it from you. In verse 8, he says, you are like a vessel wherein is no pleasure. In chapter 9, in verse 9, he says, you are like a wild donkey, all alone by himself. The second part of verse 9 and into verse 10, he says, you are like someone who goes after an illegitimate relationship. verses 11 all the way through chapter 9, verse 9, he says, you will go into bondage to Israel. And then look at chapter 9, beginning at verse 10. He says, I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first stripe in the fig tree at her first time. What's he saying? I treated you like you were a rare treasure. Think of being in the wilderness and finding grapes. Or the first figs that are on the tree. They're the sweetest, they're the best. We had a fig tree when we were in Charleston. It was given to my oldest son for his birthday. My son loved horticulture. I would have never thought to give him a fig tree. But someone in the church said, oh, I'm going to give him a fig tree. And he loved it. But you know what I found? Everything that was higher than my dog, the birds ate. And everything that was the height of my dog ate. Now, what was interesting was my dog would never eat green figs. She would go around and she would sniff and she would sniff and go on and play until they were ripe. We got very few figs off that tree. The birds in the area were well fed. My dog loved figs. But here God likens them to the most treasured of the best. He said, that's how I treated you. But we go on and we see, he says, but they went to Baal Peor and separated themselves unto that shame, and their abominations were according as they loved. As for Ephraim, their glory shall fly away like a bird from their birth, from the womb, from the conception. He says, literally, it was like you didn't exist. Not only from birth, not only from the womb, it's as if you weren't even conceived. Though they bring up their children, yet I will bereave them, that there shall not be a man left. Yea, woe also to them when I depart from them. Ephraim I saw as Tyrus, is planted in a pleasant place. We pause there and we realize he says, your rejoicing is going to turn to mourning. Everything that looked good is going to be taken away. The grapes in the wilderness, but in reality, Israel enjoyed God, but when they got a taste of Balaam through Balak, they went after that which couldn't help them. And they polluted whatever God gave them. Finally, we come to the end. And he says Israel is like a heifer, a young heifer that loves to eat and work. But you're going to be yoked to someone who will be so difficult that you won't get to eat. You'll just have to work. All the joy of work is gone. Then we come to verse 12. He pauses and he says, sow to yourselves in righteousness, reap in mercy. Break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord till he come and rain righteousness upon you. You have plowed wickedness, ye have reaped iniquity. Ye have eaten the fruit of lies, because thou didst trust in thy way, in the multitude of thy mighty men. Therefore shall a tumult among thy people, and all thy fortresses shall be spoiled. As Shalman spoiled Beth Arbel in the day of battle, the mother was dashed in pieces upon her children, so shall Bethel do unto you, because of your great wickedness. In a morning shall the king of Israel utterly be cut off. He's saying, Understand, this is where this goes. You say, this is just too long. Move on with this. My tendency would be to really go quickly through this, and I feel like I've moved very quickly through this text, but what I want you to see tonight is God says, your sin is like this, your sin is like this, your life is really like dew that's on the morning grass. You're like an overheated oven that's just constantly going toward this. You're like half-baked bread that really isn't completely taken care of. He mentions all these different things, and he says, and the end result is, what you really enjoy doing, you're going to do, and you won't enjoy it. Why? Because every good gift and every perfect gift is from above. When we try to get good gifts from bad things, it doesn't work. Satan will make things look as good as possible. He will deceive us into thinking it's good, only to have the cover pulled off and recognize you'll do all the work and you'll receive none of the benefits. So, what do we learn? One, sin doesn't pay. And when you see friends who are doing wrong things, don't be fooled. God remembers what's going on. You see, God sees our heart. I love this song that was written by a guy named Patch the Pirate. Our God measures man by a standard divine, for he sees underneath every outward design. He looks past possessions and costly attire. He studies the heart, every thought and desire. For the eyes of the Lord are searching to and fro. We have no secrets that our God does not know. Our Father knows our thoughts. He understands every part. Man sees the outside, but God sees our heart. You know, as I was thinking about the minor prophets, I thought about this. How often am I pulled towards sin? How often do I find myself accepting God's benefits, in fact, expecting God's benefits, but wanting to do my own way? Wanting to do my own thing. And I realize God is saying, sow to yourselves in righteousness, and you will reap in mercy. God wants me to admit where I am and to say, God, I've sinned against you. Please help me to do the right thing. And as I get the chance to work with my grandkids, I was talking to a friend the other day, and they made the statement, I'm with parents all the time who tell me, I would deal with that if they weren't so cute. And Cindy and I have talked a lot about what do we want them to know? We want them to know they come to Nana and Papa's house, they're going to have a really fun time, but they've got to do right. Because if you don't do right, you miss the blessing. And if we just laugh at the cute things they do, which are just sinful to the core, what happens? We've only perpetuated their own sinfulness. So we do everything we can to encourage them when they do the right thing. We do everything we can to praise them for doing the right thing. But we have to fix the things that aren't right. And it's a work in process. Not that their parents aren't doing a good job, they are, but you know, they will take every opportunity to find a chink in the armor and say, I'm not with my mom and dad right now, so I'm going to try this. And before we give little kids a hard time, could I just submit to you? Do we ever do that? Do we ever think God doesn't see? Do we ever think God's going to go, it's okay, don't worry about it? You know, in reality, if God doesn't deal with our sin, He's not a good God. He's not holy, and therefore we literally lose the very thing we want, which is the goodness. Food for thought. We're down to the last section of Hosea. I didn't know how far I'd get tonight. We're down to one more section, and it will be God's call to say, come back. Now, we always like it when we always know the end of the story, right? We always know how this ends. It's going to turn out good, right? Right? The story ends up good, right? Bill. Spoiler alert. Israel doesn't listen. Their king will be utterly cut off. And the northern tribes are gone.